who's ready to rock. Got a big daf today. Let's get into it. Who's in the house? Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, Paul in Chicago, Bella in Florida, John in Maine, Melissa in Great Neck, Hannah in Texas, Leona, Sue in Southern Illinois, Belle in Texas, Nancy in North Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Ryan is in the house, Sharon in New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx, Marjorie in Georgia, Patrice in Utah, Ella says shalom. Welcome everybody. Let's light up the darkness. All right, with God's help, we're going to finish chapter 1 here in Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of divorce, specifically the bill of divorce. We're going to continue and, God willing, finish our discussion of Mishna number 6 here in chapter 1. Mishnah number 6 held, one who says, give this bill of divorce to my wife, and then he dies before the bill of divorce is delivered. We don't deliver that bill of divorce because only a living person can get divorce once he dies before she received the get. So she's a widow. She's not going to be divorced. And it was the same with the bill of manumission. And then we had a discussion if what somebody says, give this quantity of money, 100 dinars to so-and-so, and he dies, unlike the case of the get, the bill of divorce, or the bill of manumission to free a slave, which we don't deliver. If he says, give this money to so-and-so, we do deliver that even after he dies with some limitations. Now, we picked this up about a third of the way down, page 14b. Our daf today is Tes Vav, page 15. Here we go. The Gemara discusses the meaning of the expression deliver in relation to a gift, right? So we've been seeing in yesterday's discussion in particular this idea of a kinyan, right? A formal act of acquisition that when there's a purchase or a gift, the new owner has to sort of pull it into his domain or do some kind of symbolic act which shows that he has acquired it. And until then, he has not acquired it. So let's see how that's relevant here. So we're discussing, the Gemara is going to discuss the meaning of the expression deliver, right? Deliver, like deliver this get to my wife, deliver this bill of manumission to my slave, deliver this quantity of money to so and so. Now, with regard to one who said to his agent, right? I'm appointing someone to deliver this gift of money to so and so. If one said to his agent, deliver 100 dinars to so and so. And by the way, 100 dinars, that's real money, right? Real money. At this time in the ancient world, that's real money. Deliver 100 dinars to so-and-so. And the agent went and searched for that person, but did not find him, as he had died, right? He went looking for the recipient that the sender said, give this money to so-and-so. The agent went looking for so-and-so and couldn't find him because that person had died. So in this case, it is taught in one baraisa, the money should be returned to the sender. I mean, that makes sense. What else would we think? But it is taught in another baraisa, the money should be given to the heirs of the one to whom the gift was sent. Excuse me. Now you see why the formal act of acquisition matters. Did that recipient receive the gift? No. They never found him. The agent never found that person. So how can you say that he acquired the gift so that it became his property, so that upon his death, his heirs would inherit it? He never acquired it. If he didn't acquire it, the first baraisa makes more sense, right? That the agent couldn't find him because he died. Okay, he's going to bring it back to the sender. And then the sender can decide, does he want to give it to those heirs or not? But can you see what's shaping up here? What we've talked about is this agent of delivery. He's appointed to be a messenger, to be a delivery man, to be somebody who delivers. But we saw that in the case of the bill of manumission that frees the slave, when the agent of delivery receives the bill of manumission, he also acquires it on behalf of the slave. So that the slave is free technically from the moment in which the messenger receives the bill of manumission. And that's why the slaveholder, once he gave that bill of manumission to the agent of delivery, cannot retract, right? Because the slave is actually already free. The agent received it on behalf of the slave. Whereas in the case of a wife, where the husband is sending a bill of divorce, the agent does not acquire it on behalf of the wife. And the difference was, a slave always wants to be free, so it's to his advantage, even if he doesn't know that this bill of manumission has been sent to him, the agent can acquire it on his behalf because it's to the benefit of the slave to have it acquired. Whereas a woman doesn't want to be divorced. There's certain disadvantages, right? When she gets divorced, she might be better off divorced from this awful guy, but as a financial matter, while she's married, he has an obligation to sustain her. And once they're divorced, he doesn't have that obligation. We can't assume that she would in every case want to be divorced and doesn't care about this obligation to be sustained by the husband. So the agent of delivery doesn't acquire it on her behalf. So here in the case of give 100 dinars to so-and-so, you might think, well, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. The guy wants to receive the money, so it must be that the agent of delivery acquires it for him, and therefore if he can't find the recipient because he's died, since he's acquired it on his behalf, the heirs should inherit. But we see that there's another baraisa that says that the agent should return it to the sender. Excuse me. Nina, if you're still listening, I need a glass of water. Okay. Let me see if I can get it together here. Okay, so let's see. We have the two contradictory baraisas. Let's see what's going on. Now, the Gemara suggests, let us say that these two baraisas disagree about this, the following issue. One sage, in the second baraisa that says the heirs inherit, holds that in the case of a gift, saying deliver to the delivery man is like saying acquire. Right? That the sender imagines or has it in mind that when he says deliver this to so-and-so, that the agent of delivery is acquiring it on behalf of so-and-so. And deliver is like saying acquire. And the other sage, in the first baraisa, holds that in the case of a gift, saying deliver is not like saying acquire. And that therefore the sender of the gift retains ownership and control until the gift reaches the hands of the recipient. And until then, it's his agent of delivery is holding on to it for him, but it doesn't become acquired by the recipient. Thank you so much, sweetie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam kol hibli d'ro. Okay. Now, Rabbi Abba Bar Memel said, no, everyone agrees that in the case of a gift, saying deliver is not like saying acquire. And the apparent contradiction between these two baraisas is actually not difficult. This baraisa, which says that the agent must return the money to the sender, is dealing with a case where the giver was a healthy person when he issued the instructions. Such a gift is acquired by the recipient only once it reaches his possession. And this recipient died before the gift reached him. Conversely, that other baraisa, which says that the agent of delivery should give it to the heirs of the one to whom it was sent and who died, deals with the instructions of a person on his deathbed. Since the gift of a dying person is immediately acquired by the recipient, this recipient acquired it straight away, and therefore it must be given to the heirs. Now, our cases didn't say anything about the one who's sending the gift is lying on his deathbed, but this is the way that Rabbi Abba Bar Memel says we should understand it. Rav Zevid said, it is possible to say that saying deliver is not like saying acquire, And that both this baraisa and that baraisa are dealing with a case where the giver was a person on his deathbed. Instead, the difference between the two sources is that this baraisa, which states that he should give it to the recipient's heirs, is referring to a case where the recipient was alive at the time of the giving of the money. Consequently, when the sender gives the money to the agent, the recipient immediately acquires it, and then his heirs can claim it in his stead when he dies. And that baraisa, which says that the agent must return the money to the sender, is referring to a case where the recipient was not alive at the time of the giving of the money, and consequently the agent could not acquire the money on his behalf. There's a lot of dying people here. One is on his deathbed sending the gift, and then it turns out that the other one might have been dead already at the moment that the gift was handed to the agent. Rav Papa said yet another explanation of the baraisa. This baraisa and that baraisa are both dealing with a healthy person. We're not talking about a giver who was on his deathbed, but he was a healthy person who subsequently died. He wasn't on his deathbed. We had no reason to suspect that he was about to die, nor did he. Nonetheless, he did die. Oh, so how does this change it? So the difference is that this baraisa, which said that the agent must return the money to the sender, is dealing with a case where the recipient died in the lifetime of the giver, and as he did not acquire the money himself, his heirs do not take possession of it either. By contrast, that baraisa, which states that the money should be given to the heirs of the recipient, is dealing with a case where the giver died in the lifetime of the recipient. Once he dies, it is a mitzvah to fulfill his wishes, and therefore the recipient and his heirs after him are entitled to the money. Now the Gemara further suggests, shall we say that the issue of whether saying deliver is like saying acquire, right? Remember, that's at the heart of the issue when we hand the gift or the get to the agent of delivery. Has he acquired it on behalf of the recipient, the intended recipient? Does deliver, the instruction, deliver this to so-and-so, does that equal acquire it on behalf of so-and-so? So the Gemara further suggests, shall we say that the issue of whether saying deliver is like saying acquire is actually a dispute between Tanaim, rabbis of the Mishna. This is as is taught in a baraisa that if one person said to another, deliver 100 dinars to so-and-so, and he went and searched for him but did not find him because he had died, the money should be returned to the sender. If the sender died, Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov said the money should be returned to the heirs of the sender. And some say it should be given to the heirs of the one to whom it was sent, right? So both the giver and the recipient died after the gift was given to the agent of delivery. So who does it go to? The heirs of the recipient or the heirs of the sender? Now the baraisa continues. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, who said this in the name of Rabbi Meir, it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. So whenever possible, now in this case, mitzvah, when it's worded like this, normally mitzvah just means commandment, right? But it isn't always necessarily an obligation. So sometimes we see, even in the Talmud, the word mitzvah used like, I don't want to say a good deed, which is often the way people use it in English. Like, oh, you do a mitzvah, like you're doing a good deed. That's not what mitzvah means. Mitzvah means commandment, right? So you're fulfilling a commandment. But not all commandments are obligatory, right? In the sense that you have to go out and do it. Sometimes like giving charity, whenever you do it, you are fulfilling a mitzvah to support the poor. But, and you should be giving, 10% of your income to that cause. But does that mean that you have to give money to every pauper who comes your way? Some would say yes. It's better to give even a little bit of money to everyone who asks. But, it's not like you've committed a transgression if you don't give to a particular person. So here they're saying it's a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. Does that mean it's a commandment that whatever somebody said right before they died, we do it? Maybe, right? So let's just see what he says. Let's see what Rabbi Meir says. Where am I? Okay, Rabbi Meir said, it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. Therefore, the money should be given to the heirs of the one to whom it was sent. The guy who was dying, or who later died, the sender, wanted to give it to so-and-so. Those were his wishes. Now, so-and-so died before it could be received, so who are we going to give it to? Does it go back to the heirs of the sender, or does it go to the heirs of the recipient? According to this view, it's more fulfilling the wishes of the sender if it goes to the heirs of his intended recipient, because after all, he wanted to send it to so-and-so. It would have then become part of the assets of so-and-so. And eventually, when so-and-so died, it would have passed to his heirs anyway. So maybe we're more fulfilling the wishes of the original sender by giving it to the heirs of the recipient. That's a statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say, meaning the majority who disagree with Rabbi Meir, and the rabbis say, due to the uncertainty, because we don't know what the sender's wishes would have been if he had known that so-and-so would die before the money went to him. Maybe he wouldn't have sent it. He would have kept it for his own heirs. Maybe he would have sent it. We don't know. Due to the uncertainty, they should divide it. And here in Bavel, in Babylonia, they said, whatever the agent wishes to do, he may do. Because both the sender and the recipient died, the agent can decide to give it back to the heirs of the sender or take it forward and give it to the heirs of the recipient. Rabbi Shimon Hanasi said, when an incident of this kind occurred under my jurisdiction, I inquired into how to proceed, and the sages said to me, the money should be returned to the heirs of the sender. So you see, we have not achieved a consensus view on this. Let's keep going. The Gemara suggests, is it not correct to say that they disagree about this issue? That the first Tana holds that saying deliver is not like saying acquire, and therefore the money should be returned to the sender. And Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov also hold that saying deliver is not like saying acquire, but they add that even though the sender died, one does not say it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. Consequently, the money is returned to the sender's heirs. And the sages in the clause beginning some say, claim that saying deliver is like saying acquire. Therefore, the recipient takes possession of the money immediately, and then it automatically follows that the money would be given to their heirs. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who said in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, who said this in the name of Rabbi Meir, also holds that saying deliver is not like saying acquire. However, in a case where the sender died, we say that it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. Therefore, the 100 dinars should be given to the recipient of his heirs. You see that we've got, multiple variables in this analysis. First, does deliver mean the same as acquire, so that the agent has acquired on behalf of the recipient at the time the agent receives the money because it's a gift for the recipient? Some say yes, some say no. Then, is it a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead in this situation? Some say yes, some say no. Right? Complicated. And if we do want to fulfill the statement of the dead, but we're not sure what the statement of the dead was or what the intention of the one who died was, would he want to keep it for his heirs if he couldn't give it to so-and-so? Or would he want it to go to the heirs of so-and-so if he knew that so-and-so would have died? We don't know. So what are we going to do? And that's why we have multiple viewpoints and sort of multiple outcomes. I mean, it's either going to be the heirs of the sender or the heirs of the recipient, but we get there through a few different routes. And the rabbis say they should divide it because they are uncertain about the law in the situation. And the sages in the clause beginning here, they said, maintain that in this case, the discretion, shuda, of the agent is preferable to an even division between the parties. Right? Now we could, why would you leave it up to the agent? I mean, what if the agent was FedEx? You're going to tell FedEx to decide what to do with it? Makes much more sense that we should have a policy that we could apply. Send it back to the sender's heirs, or go on, send it to the recipient's heirs. What are we going to do? Why would we want to leave it to somebody's discretion? But if you think about it, especially in the ancient world, when things weren't sent by FedEx, they were usually sent by a trusted friend or servant So that agent would probably be the one in the best position to know what the sender actually wanted and who he would want it to end up with, either the recipient's heirs or his own heirs. And Rabbi Shimon Hanasi does not offer an opinion of his own. Rather, he came to teach us an incident in which this case was decided in practice. And right, what was that example? They said it went back to the sender's heirs. Now, the Gemara rejects this suggestion. No, that analysis that I just went through, the Gemara rejects. No. It is possible that in a case where the giver was a healthy person, when he appointed the agent, everyone agrees that saying deliver is not like saying acquire. And with what are we dealing here? We're dealing with a person on his deathbed who sent these 100 dinars, and they disagree in the dispute between Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. What's that dispute? This is, as we learned in a Mishna in Bava Basra, page 156a. That's a long tractate. With regard to one who divides his property orally, right, without a will, without a written document, but he divides his property orally. Rabbi Elazar says, both in the case of a healthy person and that of a dangerously ill person, meaning a person on his deathbed, property that serves as a guarantee, i.e. land, is acquired by means of money, through a document, or by taking possession, right? The formal act of acquisition is by handing money over for the land, or through a document that transfers ownership, or by actually taking possession, like you start farming it. And property that does not serve as a guarantee, meaning movable property, can be acquired only through pulling. Like if I'm going to give you this lighter and I say, this is your lighter. Have you acquired it because I said this is your lighter? No. When do you acquire it? When you take it. When you put your hand on it and pull it, right? If it's a very heavy object, not light like this that you can pick up, you have to like actually exert some force and move it. If it's so heavy that you yourself can't move it, okay, well, are you going to take it home? What does it mean that you acquired it? You have to be able to actually move it. And maybe you have to bring an ox to do that, but it doesn't become formally yours until you pull that movable object. We're talking about a movable object. Okay, so pulling it. You don't have to necessarily lift it, but you got to move it. And that's how you formally acquire it. Okay, so why is this relevant? So this is what Rabbi Elazar says, right? Whether the person who is giving the gift is ill or healthy, right, on his deathbed, or a healthy person. If it's with respect to land, okay, the transfer happens when, what was it? Acquired by means of money, document, or taking possession. And movable property can be acquired only through pulling. That's Rabbi Elazar. And the rabbis, the majority, say if the giver is on his deathbed, then both this property and that property, movable and immovable property, land or movable property, can be acquired through speech. And there is no need for an additional act of acquisition. Amazing, right? So in other words, you can have somebody on his deathbed only when he's on his deathbed. If he's a healthy person, no, then it's the normal modes of acquisition, document, money, taking possession, or if a movable object, pulling. But if he's on his deathbed and he says, presumably in the presence of witnesses, my field out back, the big field should go to my oldest son and the other field should go to my younger son, we do it, right? Because, and just with speech, even though they haven't taken possession, and at the moment that he makes that speech, they acquire that piece of property. Now they said to Rabbi Elazar, didn't an incident of this kind occur with regard to the mother of the family of the sons of Rachel, who was ill? And she said, give my brooch to my daughter. And the brooch is worth 1,200 dinars, right? It must be solid gold. And this woman subsequently died. And the sages fulfilled her statement. And Rabbi Elazar said to them that the sons of Rachel should be buried by their mother, i.e. he cursed them. Rabbi Elazar meant that it is not possible to bring a proof from this incident, as these sons were wicked people. That's why the sages decided that incident that, oh no, let's make sure that the daughter gets the brooch, because these sons are horrible people and we don't want them to benefit in any way from the estate of a righteous woman. because there's such wicked people, there were other factors when the sages made a disposition of the assets after this woman's death. And so we can't learn out from that example that this is a precedent that we should follow in every situation. Now the Gemara states, the first Tana holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, who holds that there must be an actual active acquisition or the money still belongs to the giver. And Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov also hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Lazar. However, they add that even though the giver died, one does not say it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. And the sages in the clause beginning, some say, hold in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who say that the statement of a person on his deathbed affects acquisition through mere speech. A lot of variables now. What are we going to follow? And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who said his opinion in the name of Rabbi Meir, holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Right? Rabbi Elazar does not allow an acquisition through speech, even on a deathbed. He says you require the formal act of acquisition in all situations. But the rabbis say a person on his deathbed, we're going to listen to what they say and fulfill the statement of the dead. Now, however, I think Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi maintains that where the giver died, we say it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead. And the rabbis say they should divide it. And now we're back to the case of the giver who's sending 100 dinars. And then after he sends it, he dies. And before the recipient receives it, he dies. So the giver, the sender, and the recipient both died. The agent has the money, and we're trying to figure out who gets it. We've seen a lot of different views. The heirs of the sender, the heirs of the recipient, the agent decides, or they split it, right? So the rabbis, the majority said, split it. So what's going on here? A dilemma was raised before those that were studying this complex issue. Is the Rabbi Shimon Hanasi mentioned here himself a Nasi, meaning the head of the Sanhedrin, or does the Baraisa mean that he spoke in the name of the Nasi? And the Gemara suggests, coming here, that which Rav Yosef, who was precise in his statement, says, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Hanasi. This indicates that he was an actual Nasi. But you can still raise the dilemma. Is he a Nasi, or does the Baraisa mean that he spoke in the name of the Nasi, as Rav Yosef may merely be quoting the above Baraisa? And the Gemara has no answer for this question and states that this dilemma shall stand. And the Gemara returns to the matter itself. Rav Yosef says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Hanasi, that the money should be returned to the heirs of the sender. And the Gemara raises a difficulty, but didn't we maintain that the statement of a person on his deathbed is considered written and delivered? That was the statement of the rabbis, right? The majority, that through speech on a deathbed, whatever that person says, I give to so-and-so, that so-and-so has acquired it at that moment, only because the giver who spoke that is the intent to give that gift was on his deathbed. And the Gemara answers, Rav Yosef establishes this law with regard to a healthy person, not someone on his deathbed. And the Gemara asks, but he said that the money should be returned to the heirs of the sender. And we maintain that it is a mitzvah to fulfill the statement of the dead, even if he issued those instructions when he was healthy. And the Gemara answers, amend Rabbi Shimon Hanasi's statement and teach, return the money to the sender, not to his heirs, as this is referring to a case where the sender had not died. We're leaving a lot of balls up in the air, but that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, here in Tractate Gittin. Mishna number 1 of chapter 2. With regard to one who brings a bill of divorce from a country overseas. Sounds a lot like Mishnah number 1 of chapter 1. We're still talking about the one who brings a get from overseas, and he's going to have to make that declaration. It was written in my presence, and it was signed in my presence. And remember that Rava said the reason for this is because witnesses who were there when the husband wrote the get overseas are not going to be available in the land of Israel and Eretz Yisrael when the wife receives the get. So we require that the agent of delivery be able to state that get that your husband wrote. He wrote it in my presence and he signed it in my presence. And now I'm going to give it to you in the presence of witnesses here at the moment of delivery. And Rava said it's because the witnesses from overseas won't be available here. That's why we require the sender to make that statement. And Rabbah agreed with Rava. That is why we require that statement. But Rabbah adds an additional reason, not one reason, but two reasons the sages made that decree, because also the scribes overseas are not necessarily familiar with the law that a get must be written for a particular woman and you can't reuse a get that was used for someone else. Okay. So, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 2. With regard to one who brings a bill of divorce from a country overseas, and he says, the bill of divorce was written in my presence, but it was not signed in my presence. It was written in my presence, but it was not signed in my presence. Now what are we going to do? It's a requirement that it was written and signed in his presence. If he can't say that, does that mean that she's not divorced? Or does it mean we're going to have to ratify the signatures of the witnesses on the get? Let's see. With regard to one who brings a bill of divorce from a country overseas, and he says, the bill of divorce was written in my presence, but it was not signed in my presence. Or if he said, it was signed in my presence, but it was not written in my presence. Or all of it was written in my presence, and half of it was signed in my presence. I.e., he observed the signing of only one of the witnesses. Or half of it was written in my presence, and all of it was signed in my presence. In all these cases, the document is invalid. If one agent bringing a bill of divorce says it was written in my presence, and one other agent says it was signed in my presence, it is invalid. If two agents say it was written in our presence, and one says it was signed in my presence, it is invalid. That's a surprise, because for at least one witness, it was written and signed in his presence. So why does the fact that there's an additional witness disqualify that get? We'll find out. And Rabbi Yehuda deems the document valid in that situation. Now, if one agent says it was written in my presence and two agents say it was signed in our presence, then it is valid. That's Mishnah number 1. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara asks, with regard to the entire Mishnah, why do I need all these further examples? Didn't it teach these laws once? As the Mishnah states on page 2a, meaning Mishnah number 1, that we started our journey through Tractate Gittin with it, if one brings a get from overseas, he must be able to state it was written in my presence and signed in my presence. So all these examples is where he can't state that, because it was written in his presence, but it wasn't signed in his presence, or vice versa. Why do we need all these examples? This indicates that if one did not state this declaration, then the bill of divorce is invalid, right? What we learned just on the first Mishnah of chapter 1. Now the Gemara explains, if the law were derived from that Mishnah alone in chapter 1, I would say he is required to issue this statement ab initio. But if he did not say it, the bill of divorce is nevertheless valid after the fact. Therefore, this Mishnah teaches us that the bill of divorce is in fact invalid. Pardon me, it's very hot in here. Now, the Mishnah taught that if the agent said half of it was written in my presence and all of it was signed in my presence, the document is invalid, right? That's the one that gives us pause. Why? At least one of those guys had it written and signed in his presence. So the Gemara asks, with regard to which half of the bill of divorce did he claim he saw it written? If we say that he saw its first half written, but didn't this is where he saw half of it written. Not the case where there's two agents, but where he said only half of it was written in his presence. So with regard to which half of the bill of divorce did he claim he saw it written? If we say that he saw its first half written, but didn't Rabbi Elazar say, even if the husband or scribe wrote only one line of it for her sake, the agent is no longer required to check if the rest of the bill of divorce was written properly. Rather, Rav Ashi said he testifies that he saw that its latter half was written, and he does not testify with regard to the first half, which is the primary section of the bill of divorce, and that's why it's invalid. Now, the Mishnah taught that if he said all of it was written in my presence and half of it was signed in my presence, meaning that the agent only observed the signing of one of the witnesses. So in this case, this get is invalid, at least until we can ratify the signatures of the witnesses, but right now it's invalid. So Rav Chisda says, and even if two people testify to the signature of the second witness, and the court ratifies the signature, nevertheless, it is still invalid. And what is the reason for this ruling? After all, the court has the agent's testimony with regard to one signature, and then we have witnesses come and ratify the signature of the other witness. Why would this get be invalid? And the Gemara answers, the document must be authenticated either entirely through the process of the ratification of a bill of divorce, i.e. the bill of divorce must be ratified like any other legal document by two people attesting to the validity of all the witnesses, or it must be entirely ratified via the rabbinic decree that the agent is deemed credible when he states it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. And you don't have that full case either way. The agent of delivery didn't see all of it signed in his presence. And when witnesses come to ratify the signatures, they're only ratifying one of the signatures. And you can't split this sort of ratification procedure in that way. And that's why we don't have a valid get. Now, Rava objects to this. Is there any situation in which if one person said the document is valid, i.e. if the agent would have attested to the signature of the second witness, the bill of divorce would be valid? And now that there are two witnesses who attest to the signatures, it is invalid? Rather, Rava says, even if he, the agent, and another person testify with regard to the signature of the second witness, the bill of divorce is invalid. And what is the reason for this? Perhaps people will come to confuse it with the typical case of ratification of legal documents and will rely on one witness who testifies about his own signature and that of the other signatory, while another witness joins with him to testify with regard to the other signature. And as a result of this, the full sum of money minus a quarter will be extracted based upon the testimony of one witness. In order to ratify legal documents in general, two witnesses must testify as to the validity of both of the signatures. If the sages were to allow one witness to testify about his own signature and another witness to join him in testifying about the other signature in the case of a bill of divorce, it may lead to the same method being employed with regard to other legal documents. Why do we have reduced requirements for a bill of divorce? So the wife won't be stuck, right? Because the husband disappears and they're not going to be able to ratify it any other way, and then she could never remarry. So they're making a special, I'm not going to call it an exception, but they're making a special procedure that's going to allow us to ratify bill of divorce. Now, it's not, universal that, okay, bill of divorce is here, we're going to find a way to make it valid. No. It's just that there's certain procedures that are going to allow a bill of divorce to be validated that won't work for other financial instruments. And lest people get confused, because in the ancient world, many people never had cause to enter into contracts. They weren't businessmen, right? They weren't buying and selling large amounts of land or goods, etc. They grew up in that house they were born in. They died in that house. And the only contract they ever entered into was a marriage contract. So they think that's how all contracts are run. So if the sages have to be careful that if they're going to make distinctions in the laws of divorce agreements and marriage agreements that are different than financial instruments, that they're doing it in such a way that won't create confusion, right? They have to be mindful of the unintended consequences of their decrees. Now, Rava says, even if he, the agent, and another person testify with regard to the signature of the second witness, the bill of divorce is invalid. I'm sorry, I just read that. Okay. Now, Rav Ashi, and we're on 15b. Rav Ashi objects to this. Is there any situation in which if he himself would complete his entire statement by saying, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence, and the document would be valid, and now that there is another one who testifies with him, the bill of divorce becomes invalid? I mean, if he's able to say it was written in my presence and signed in my presence, why would you somehow invalidate this get when you add another person who's helping to testify to its authenticity? So rather, Rav Ashi says that even if the agent says, I am the second witness who signed the bill of divorce, it is invalid. And what is the reason for this? A bill of divorce cannot be validated by a combination of two types of credibility. It must be authenticated either entirely through the ratification of the bill of divorce in the manner that other documents are ratified, where both signatures are attested to by witnesses all at the same time, or it must be entirely ratified via the rabbinic decree that the age of delivery brings it and says, it was written in my presence, and the husband and the witnesses signed it in my presence, and I can attest to that, and then he delivers in the presence of other witnesses. But you can't make combination platter, a little from column A, a little from column B. Now the Gemara cites a proof for this claim of Rav Ashi. We learned in the Mishnah that if an agent for a bill of divorce said all of it was written in my presence and half of it was signed in my presence, this bill of divorce is invalid. And the Gemara clarifies what are the circumstances with regard to the other half of the bill of divorce. If we say that there is no one who testifies about it at all, that's problematic. Now, the Mishnah taught that if one agent says it was written in my presence, and one agent says it was signed in my presence, in which case this agent testifies with regard to all the writing, and that agent testifies with regard to all the signing, still it's invalid, because the rabbinic decree was only one person can say both statements. We don't split it. So now, when the agent testifies that only half of it was signed in his presence, is it necessary to say that the document is invalid? Rather, the Mishnah must be teaching us that the bill of divorce is invalid even if there is additional testimony with regard to its second signature. And this novelty can be explained either in accordance with the opinion of Rava, who holds that the agent joins with another person to testify about the second signature, or in accordance with the opinion of Rav Ashi, who holds that he testifies about his own signature. The Gemara adds, and this is to exclude the opinion of Rav Chisda, who declares that the document is invalid even when there is a full ratification of the second signature, because the Mishnah merely alludes to the novelty in this clause without specifying it. One may infer only the lesser novelty. And since Rav Chisda's novelty is greater than that of the other two sages, had the Mishnah been taught for that purpose, it should have issued an explicit statement to that effect. So we can't learn out that extensive lesson. So the Gemara rejects this suggestion. Rav Chisda could have said to you, and according to your reasoning, why do I need the ruling of the Mishnah which states that if the agent said it was written in my presence, but it was not signed in my presence, the bill of divorce is invalid? The Mishnah could simply have stated, if he said all of it was written in my presence and half of it was signed in my presence, it is invalid. And one would have inferred that it is invalid all the more so if one does not testify with regard to the signature at all. Rather, one must say that the Tana teaches the Mishnah employing the style of not only this, but also that, meaning each ensuing statement adds something novel. So if so, here too, the Tana teaches the Mishnah employing the style, not only this, but also that. In other words, Rav Chisda would answer that the above inference, i.e., that the clause dealing with it was written in my presence, but it was not signed in my presence, this clause must be teaching an additional novelty. That idea is incorrect. And this is because it is a stylistic feature of the Mishnah to teach a less novel case followed by a more novel one, regardless of the fact that had it taught the more novel case at first, there would have been no need to mention the less novel case at all. Therefore, there is no need to infer a special unstated novelty from this clause at all, which means it cannot be cited as proof against Rav Chisda's greater novelty. Right? You see how careful they are to say, well, it sounds like from the way it's written, we could infer such and such. But then they test that and go, no, you can't necessarily infer such and such because the style of the two clauses that came before it do not necessarily lead to that implication nor that inference, etc. That's what they're testing, right? Now, tangentially, the Gemara, and I'm almost done. If you got questions or comments, get them in. Tangentially, the Gemara cites a discussion that involves a similar underlying principle. Rav Chisda says, with regard to Shabbos domains, an embankment, i.e., a height disparity between two surfaces of 5 handbreadths, and an additional partition of 5 handbreadths, do not join together to form a partition of 10 handbreadths, which is the minimum height for a partition to enclose a private domain. And a halakhic partition is regarded as being composed of 10 handbreadths only if it is composed entirely of a partition, for example, a fence, or entirely of an embankment, like the wall of a pit or a hill. Why are we learning about this right now? Because we're asking, can you combine sort of, different types of legally significant elements, I guess I would say, right? In other words, here where you have an agent who's able to say that get was signed in my presence, and then you have another agent who says it was written in my presence. What we need is one agent to say it was written in my presence and signed in my presence. So can you combine these two people? It was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence into one person? No, you can't. And likewise, you can't combine an embankment that is half the height needed to separate between the public and private domain with a fence that's only half the height needed and say that together they form the full height. No, you can't make that combination. And you could see it's a policy reasoning of the sages that this is going to lead to confusion. If we allow that, we need to make the case simpler. Okay, a hill that's 10 amos high, 10 handbreadths high, or not amos, tefachim, right? A hill that's 10 tefachim high can separate. An embankment that's 10 tefachim high can separate. A fence that's 10 tefachim, 10 handbreadths high can separate. But you can't combine half a fence with half an embankment. And finally, Maremar taught an embankment of 5 handbreadths and a partition of 5 handbreadths do join to form a partition of 10 handbreadths. And the Gemara comments, and the law is that they do join together. Oh, well, if these embankments and fences join together, maybe the two agents who can only testify, each of them, that it was signed in my presence, the other one can only testify it was written in my presence, maybe they can join together. But it appears no. Rav Chisda's opinion is analogous to the aforementioned case that a bill of divorce must be either entirely upheld by the agent or entirely upheld by the ratification of signatures, although the law is ruled differently in the case of Shabbos domains. You could say it's kind of like the law of Shabbos domains, but it's not similar enough that we're going to extend the ruling from one area of law to the other. That's what I've got for us today. Let's check comments or questions. Sharon, did the sender owe the recipient the money? That would make a big difference. I think it would. I think in all those cases we were talking about, the sender said, give 100 dinars to so-and-so, it was a gift. Because if it was a loan, pay him back, then who really owns the 100 dinars? The lender, right? The one who's going to be paid back. And I think that would certainly make a difference once he said pay him back. Now you can make the argument that the agent acquires immediately on behalf, right? In that case, deliver, because they kept saying deliver is the same as acquire in the case of a gift. Or they argued about that. Some said yes, some said no. But in the case of a loan, does deliver mean the same as acquire? Maybe. It's a different analysis for sure. Why is it a maybe? Because of something we saw yesterday, right? Because if it really means acquire it on behalf of the lender. Here, I'm sending it to the lender, pay him back. And the agent loses the money along the way or absconds with it. Then who bears the loss? right? The lender will say, hey, you never paid me back the loan. The sender, the borrower, would say, well, I gave the money to so-and-so. He was supposed to bring it to you. At that point, I'm out, right? So it's tricky to say that the agent acquires on behalf of the lender in that situation. And as we can see, like, why are we in lender, borrower, agent of delivery law when we're really in the laws of divorce? But it's because of this whole question of this agent of delivery and that special rabbinic decree, which is not a general rabbinic principle, right? It's only to protect the wife. Usually for a document to count, we have to have the ability to ratify the signatures of the witnesses. And finally, Renee, I've been taught to give money to the first person who asks when entering a city, especially a new city. I wonder if there is a citation for this. Anyone else heard this? Well, we saw, right, I think 2 days ago, this idea that if, you're not a poor person, but you harvest some of the peah, the corner of a field that is reserved for poor people. So you're not poor, so you can't take it for yourself. But you're thinking, well, I know a poor person who really needs this. It's hard for him to get out of the house. I'm going to collect this for him and bring it to him. So has that poor person that the non-poor person harvested for, has that poor person acquired it? And we saw that the sages said, no, because in fact, you can't be an agent for the poor person. Only poor people are supposed to pick the corners of the field. We don't want other people getting involved. There are charity collectors who collect on behalf of the needy, but that's not the case of peah. And so they said when he cuts down that corner of the field, he should give it to the first poor person that he runs into and not reserve it for his own choice of poor person, because he shouldn't have got involved in this in the first place. That's in the case of peah. In terms of charity, I'm with you, and I'd like to hear the source for it. I'm not sure. I feel like I agree with you, like I've heard that somewhere too. We definitely have a source in the Talmud. I don't know what page it's on, but when the question came up, okay, you're meiser, right? You're tithing. In other words, you earned $100. Let's say you have an income of $100. So if you're tithing properly, you're going to give away $10. Is it preferable to give the $10 to one poor person? Or is it preferable to give $1 each to 10 poor people? Which is preferable? On the one hand, you could say, well, if I give the $10 to one person, he can do more with that. Maybe he can buy a fishing pole and get on his feet, as it were. But the Gemara actually teaches, and we can look this up, I just don't remember what page it's on. The Gemara teaches, no, it's better to give, $1 at a time to 10 different people, because that teaches you to be more generous. That teaches you to be in the habit of giving. The more often you give, even if you're giving smaller amounts, the better, right? We want to be people who are in the habit of giving. And so I think it's very consistent with that teaching, what you heard, that when you go to a new city or whenever people ask you for money, you give. You don't have to give a lot, but it's good to give anytime you're asked. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, which is noon Pacific. Saturday will be the regular Saturday time, which is when Shabbos ends here in LA, and it's summer, so it's quite late, but that's what we do. Sunday, I'm just telling you now, Sunday, the class is going to be at noon instead of at 6 p.m. The normal Sunday time is 6 p.m., but this Sunday, it's going to be at noon because we have a family obligation. Okay.